I'm Walter Isaacson, and it's my honor to be back here again, this time for the 8th annual Civic presentation of the Preston Robert Tisch Award in Civic Leadership. And even though I'm not supposed to introduce him now, I can't think of anybody I know who's a better recipient of this award. It's part of our leadership series, Conversation with Great Leaders who have transformed the world. The series, which we are presenting this evening, is funded by the family of the late Preston Robert Tisch to help carry on his legacy of leadership, public service, and philanthropy. Prior recipients include Wynton Marsalis, Billie Jean King, John Lewis, Darren Walker, and Sonia Sotomayor. Bob Tisch made an indelible impact on society, in business, in sports, in public service, and in philanthropy. He built the Lowe's Corporation with his brother Larry. He served as Postmaster General of the United States, and in partnership with Wellington Mara, owned the New York Giants. But it was his concern for people and community by which he is most remembered, especially the people of New York. Tonight's recipient, Mayor Mitch Landrieu, the mayor of the city of New Orleans, understands the importance of building and sustaining a healthy and inclusive community. Jonathan Tisch, who will present tonight's award to Mayor Landrieu, carries on Bob's tradition of community involvement. He's head of Lowe's Corporation, chairman of New York Rising, which played an instrumental role in reviving tourism in the aftermath of 9/11. Crane's New York Business selected him as one of the first members of their Hall of Fame. In addition to his contribution to the city, John and his family, his brother Steve, his sister Laurie, who I'm usually introducing at this thing, and his wife Lizzie, are also generous supporters of this program in the Institute. Before turning the program over to John, let me show you a quick video of this remarkable group who's been honored with this award.
I think kindness and generosity was in my father's DNA. I remember so many acts of kindness from when I was young. Anytime anybody needed something, he would take out his little brown notebook and write a note and always follow up the next day. To one of the initiatives that he's most known for, Take the Field, which rebuilt 45 playing fields in every high school that needed one. I think the 8 people who have won the award in civic leadership in honor of Preston Robert Tisch, they all embody what the Aspen Institute is so well known for. People who embody and have gone from success to significance.
The arts in general provide us with an understanding of why we are alive.
I try to tell young people, particularly, the more you know about history, the more you know about yourself. And because you have to know how we got there, and then how do you want to shape the future.
But until you actually bear witness to feel what the people who you're trying to help are feeling, you're not going to be empathetic enough to really know what to do.
The best ways out of poverty is a job. So as Laurie talked about getting jobs, you have to go and create jobs.
So you must never, ever give up. You must never, ever give in. Never become bitter. Be hopeful. Be optimistic.
Let's really interrogate why there are so many homeless people. Why do we live in a society that produces this much homelessness? And what are the structural underpinnings that seemingly produce and reproduce bad outcomes?
I see every challenge of a tragedy as an opportunity to get up and figure out what we have to do right.
It is important for people to realize you can be successful and still make a difference. It's not an either or. I think the award is on a terrific track, and I hope we continue it for a very long time.
Good evening, everybody. On behalf of my brother Steve, my sister Laurie, It is truly an honor to be with you tonight. When you look at the men and women who have been recognized over the past 8 years, who really stand for so much and have accomplished the ideals that Bob Tisch stands for, is really quite something. I want to give my sister a huge amount of credit because this whole program was her idea. And I know that she has been committed for so many years to the Aspen Institute for the important work that they are doing. But it was Lori who said to Steve and myself, we need to recognize men and women who are making a difference in our country and do it in the name of our father, who, as she aptly described, a man of passion, a man of caring, a man of the people. That was Bob Tisch. And in addition to the award in the field of health that Lori still supports in honor of our late mother, Joan, we were blessed with parents that stood for a lot and taught us the difference between right and wrong and doing what's appropriate in our community. And tonight we recognize a family that also has taught us a lot. When you look at this family's dedication not only to New Orleans, to Louisiana, but to our country, you see leaders, you see men and women who have really put aside their own concerns and tried to create a greater good. Mitch and I were just talking about the relationship that his father, Moon, had with Bob Tisch. And I remember back to 1977, you all can also have that vision. Front page of the Daily News, headlines, Gerald Ford to New York City, drop dead. But Moon Landrieu, when he was head of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, made a difference. And he ensured that New York City was able to not only survive that moment, but certainly thrive. And Bob Tisch and Moon Landrieu go back to 1977 when they made a commitment so that our city would be the great metropolis that it is today. And certainly Mitch's sister, Mary, her leadership in the Senate for so many years made such a difference in all of our lives. Mitch and I have known each other a very long time. Certainly we as New Yorkers remember back to the aftermath of the tragedy of 9/11, when it was the travel and tourism industry that immediately responded to the needs of our citizens, to the needs of the business community, to the needs of us as a country. And we formed, as Walter mentioned, New York Rising. And we came together as an industry to spread the message that indeed, even though we are deeply saddened and we are still in shock, New York City was still open for business. And we made the appeal to all Americans to come and visit us. And it was at that moment that the term patriotic tourism was founded. And 2 weeks after the tragedy, we started seeing people come from Oregon, and from Hawaii, and from California, and from Louisiana to help us through a very difficult moment. In February of 2006, when I was honored to be chair of NYC and Company, we brought 100 New Yorkers to New Orleans. And our slogan was, NYC loves NOLA. Mitch was Lieutenant Governor at the time, and in essence, he was head of tourism for the whole state of Louisiana. And we spent 3 days trying to bring back that notion that we in New York used so that New Orleans and Louisiana, after the tragedy of Katrina, could embrace this industry and show that people will come back, people will travel, we will save these really good jobs in the travel and tourism industry. And Mitch went on from Lieutenant Governor to now become the mayor of the great city of New Orleans. He speaks with one voice. He believes in unifying the city, not tearing it apart. His vision has created an economy that is working, some 15,000 new jobs since Mitch became mayor, and he will continue to do more. The 61st mayor of the great city of New Orleans was elected in 2010, and here we are at the end of 2017. And my brother, my sister, and I can think of no individual today who follows in the footsteps of 8 other men and women who have done extraordinary things, who deserves to be recognized once again in the name of our father, Bob Tisch, then the mayor of the great city of New Orleans, Mayor Mitch Landrieu. Congratulations.
Yeah.
And Mitch is going to join Walter in a conversation. So Walter, if you can come back up.
Walter, do you have a favorite side? How's everybody doing?
Hey, everybody.
Thank you. Hi, Kitty.
Well, instead of doing a long introduction, I'm going to play biographer and walk you through your biography, because I've just read the manuscript of what will be probably the biggest book this spring, assuming I can get my book out of the way, which is In the Shadow of Monuments, which is coming out in March by Penguin Viking, that Mayor Landrieu has just written.
No, my book's about Renoir.
Oh.
Not Da Vinci.
Botticelli.
About Botticelli.
No, it's about a personal journey and a political journey and a leadership journey. So it seemed appropriate for tonight. You grew up in Broadmoor. Tell me when you first understood the concept of race.
Before I do that, could I say thank you?
Yeah, you may.
Thank you all. Jonathan, thank you very much. Laurie, thank you so much. Yesterday, I was having lunch with my mom and dad, and I told them that I was coming up tonight. My father's 88 years old. And he stopped and said, please tell them how much I love Bob Tisch and how much I enjoyed working with him back in 1976 when New York was on the verge of bankruptcy, as you know. And from that moment, the city of New Orleans and the city of New York entered into what has turned out to be just an unbelievable relationship. So after September 11th, as you know, many of us came up here to help. 5 fire trucks were sent up. We did everything that we could. And then, of course, when Katrina hit, as you said, the entire city of New York came down and embraced New Orleans. And so I hope this relationship lasts for a very long time, and it's very special to us, and thank you. I really don't deserve to be in the company of the people that you have given this award to, and I'm very thankful and humble. And I want to also thank the Aspen family. I see a lot of folks out there. I think I saw Bob just a minute ago, and Damien and Kitty and Eric and the whole Aspen family that's embraced me, you know, so wonderfully, and I thank them as well. And of course, my wife Cheryl's here with us, you know, tonight.
Hey, Cheryl.
So, in any event, thank you very much. I'm very honored. You know, you asked me, the issue of race is an issue that this country has never adequately dealt with. And for those of us that grew up in the South, I should just start off by saying thank you, Alabama. It was an important. Last night was a very important moment for the country, wherever you happen to be on the political spectrum. That race was a bellwether for whether or not the United States of America is going to step forward or step back. And I think last night, the people of Alabama said, you know, there are boundaries and there are values, irrespective of your personal political philosophy. And I think a lot of it, quite frankly, has to do with race. And I have said many, many times, really standing on the shoulders of my father, who you all may not know about his racial walk, but he was one of 2 legislators in 1960 when he was a young father of 4 children with a wife with a 5th child in utero, happened to be me, and then 4 more subsequently to follow. My mother had 9 children in 11 years. And so here was this young lawyer in the Deep South in 1960, just a couple of years after Brown versus Board of Education, before George Wallace was in the doorstep. Our governor was standing there. And my father was one of 2 legislators to vote against the segregation package. And on the night that he did that, he was confronted in the elevator on the way out by a congressman named Rainick, and then Leander Perez, who was one of the great racists of all time, who basically stuck a finger in his chest and said, you know, we're going to get you. We know you're kind. And that really kind of started the Landrieu involvement on the side of being progressive on the issue of race. And I can't remember a time in my life. I was born in 1960, so I don't remember 61, 62, and 63. But I remember after that, 64 on. And I have, vague memories of all of the agony that was going on in the country, but very vague. But while that was going on, I was raised in a racially mixed neighborhood. Walter and I actually grew up around the corner from each other. He grew up on the corner of Galvez and Napoleon. I grew up on Prius Street and General Pershing, which are 3 blocks away from each other. The neighborhood that we grew up in was called Broadmoor. It was a middle class to lower middle class, working class neighborhood. It was a neighborhood that was one of the first integrated neighborhoods in the city. It not only had African Americans, whites, but it had Catholics and a Jewish population. It was multiracial and multi-ethnic. And I never knew anything other than that my entire life. And it was a very peaceful, wonderful neighborhood where we all played in the street together, and was really not, because I was so young, really paying attention to, of course, what was going on in my father's life, which were basically death threats and challenges that he would never survive politically and physically in some instances. And then, of course, the agony that was going on. And it wasn't until I was about 13 years old that I really kind of came face to face with the ugly face of racism personally. I tell the story in the book, but I was 13 years old. I was an 8th grader at what is called Jesuit High School, raised by the Jesuit fathers. It's an all-boys high school. And it was an afternoon, and the principal, whose name is Father Harry Thompson, quite famous Jesuit social justice advocate, came and got me out of class. And it's not unusual for me to get called into the principal's office, but it's highly unusual for the principal to come get me in class. So I thought I was really in trouble. And what he said to me is, you need to come to my office. There's been a threat on your life. And I know you have basketball practice. I got to walk you across the street. And so he walked me across the street to the gym, and then he left me, which I kind of thought, in being mayor now, looking back on it, was kind of peculiar. He left me over there. I'm like, so if the mayor's son had a death threat, I mean, something else would happen today. But he left me in the locker room, and my friend said, what's going on, what's going on? And I said, oh, somebody, threatened my life. And one of my friends runs in and says, there's some lady outside who said she wants to kill you. So we did exactly what any teenager would do. We went outside to see who it was. And it was an agitated woman named Sylvia Pizzo, who was, her. You've seen Sylvia Pizzo 1,000 times, a community activist that yells and screams at awful. But this lady was, her cause was racism. And she went to dig in her purse. And all my friends said, she's got a gun. And they all fled and left me standing there by myself. And she actually did not pull a gun out of her purse, but she threw a card at me. And on the card, it said that your daddy ruined the city, he's an N lover, and you should be ashamed. And I just thought, that was just such a strange thing for that lady to do to me. I was just 13. I was playing basketball. And I went home and told my father about it. And instead of him being mad about it, he said, she's just really challenged. She's not dangerous, but she's really challenged. And I just saw a lot of pain in her face. And then just throughout my life, all of these things continue to converge in our lives and in our neighborhood, as you know. And race was never far away, because as my father became the mayor of a city that was becoming more African American, he honored campaign promises to open up City Hall for the first African American department head, this first CAO, and then he really meant it. These weren't token appointments. These were individuals that were well-educated, I mean, really as smart and fast as anybody else. And by the time he left, a good part of City Hall was run by individuals who actually lived in the city. So the city government looked a lot like it. And he took a lot of heat, and we took a lot of heat for it. And that really was kind of the environment political environment that we grew up in. But the environment that I was raised in was always a multi-ethnic, biracial coalition. And as you know, I grew up down the street from Ann Duplessis, who was an African-American state senator, across the street from Norman Roussel, who was the first provost of a university in the city of New Orleans. And I just had not understood that my white friends later in my life said, I didn't like your neighborhood. I was scared of your neighborhood because you lived in a black neighborhood. And it never occurred to me that I lived in a black neighborhood, because I really didn't. I lived in a mixed neighborhood. But their view of my life was, if there was 1 or 2 African Americans that lived in the neighborhood, it was quote unquote a black neighborhood. And that issue of race and exclusion and involvement was something that has been part of our life the entire time.
And Broadmoor and even the whole footprint of New Orleans has stayed integrated, unlike many cities we've gone to since then. What do you think is the benefit of that? How did that help the whole New Orleans culture?
Well, you saw a clip of Wynton Marsalis a little while ago, and he said art helps reflect life. And he's really a historian. He's one of the world's greatest musicians, but he's really a historian, and music is his medium to tell that story. And jazz, which is what his passion is, it was created from a diversity of different kinds of cultures and music, which happened to occur in New Orleans at Congo Square. And Wynton tells the story a lot. And so diversity for New Orleans has always been a strength. The city of New Orleans, its essence, from its beginning, we're about to celebrate our 300th anniversary, as a city that was once owned and run by France and then Spain. It has a huge number of influences from Senegal and Gambia, which is where most of the slave trade came from, part of the German coast, the Irish, the Italians. And much like New York, it is a multi-ethnic place. And although it's in the deep South, it has never really been your typical, stereotypical, old Southern, white racist city. It has just never been that way. And we have derived and created, I think, one of the great cultures of the world because of the diversity that we have. And as a matter of fact, you all know this intuitively, because when Katrina hit and you saw the pictures of the American citizens on the steps of the convention center and at the Superdome, you gasped. I'm sure that there was an audible gasp at the possibility that we could lose the great American city of New Orleans that you knew could never be replaced because of the soul of that city. And that soul came from was formed from the multicultural inputs that manifest itself in our language, our food, the way we love, the way we live, who we marry, and what it is that we produce. And
the other city that's very like that to me is New York City. The only other great multicultural city.
I think in very many ways that's true. I mean, I've said many times, lovingly, that New Orleans is the little sister of New York. But it's a very symbiotic relationship between our city and your city, and it feels very much the same. Now, New York's a little bit bigger, a little bit more traffic. You go a little bit fast. You demand that you get your coffee a lot quicker at Starbucks than we do in New Orleans. You don't necessarily stand on the street and talk as much as we do about how's your mama and all that stuff. But in terms of the incredible diversity and the richness of the culture that you have here, I see Damien here just in terms of the cultural economy that exists in art, in music, in food. That's a way of life. It's just not a thing. It's just not a front of the house thing that you view and enjoy. It's a back of the house thing that provides jobs and edifies people's lives. New Orleans has that in its richness, which is why I think, Jonathan, it was, besides the fact that y'all just have a huge heart and you wanted to come down, it was something that just occurred to you immediately to get to New Orleans as fast as you could to help save us, because what you do here is so much similar to what we do there. On the tourism front, which of course you guys have led the country and the world in, New Orleans has 38,000 hotel rooms in just 16 square blocks. It's got 80,000 people that work in the industry. There are 140,000 that work in the state, and it's a $5 billion piece of our economy. So art, music, history, that's our life. That's our lifeblood, and it comes from our culture.
And by the way, a shout out for Lowe's, which came right back after the storm. Well, but also when we had to have one of the fundraisers for my wife's on the link, Trajewski, Lowe's was there to
100%.
give us hotel, give us rooms.
I mean, right away. Some people can come down and just enjoy a weekend and help people work, and that was good, but they invested money, like in real time. And nobody in this city would let New Orleans fail, and we'll be forever grateful for that, which is why when I had the great honor of becoming mayor, I made a commitment to the people of this country that we would use every dollar that was given to us to make sure that we created a city that was a laboratory of innovation and change, that everything that we did there would be able to be replicated across the country and would be a best practice. And of course now, if you come to New Orleans, I think if you haven't been there in a while, you ought to come. We have completely physically rebuilt our school system, 33 brand new state-of-the-art learning centers that you would otherwise know as schools, which are as fine a physical facility a kid can go to in the entire country. We are the only 100% charter school movement in the country, 100%. And today in the New York Times, they noted that we're the number 6 school district that had the highest level of quickest growth. So in other words, graduation rates are way up, dropout rates are way down. And here's the great thing. My kids, the kids that they said couldn't learn in the city, have completely closed the achievement gap with the kids outside of the city. So you can't tell us our kids can't learn. If given the opportunity, they can. We've rebuilt our healthcare delivery system. We've rebuilt 2 beautiful big new hospitals. We're building a new airport. We now have opened up the river for 3.2 miles of contiguous riverfront space, and the city of New Orleans is doing as well as it has ever done. But we continue to have the same tremendous challenges that you saw Darren Walker talk about up there with education and job issues and infrastructure, the same thing that the country is facing. But what the city of New Orleans has done in a magnificent way is it's paid back to the country, you know, the debt that it owed by making sure that we allowed ourselves to be the hubs for innovation, entrepreneurship, and change so that people from across America can learn how to fix difficult problems in their cities. And race is one of them, which takes us back to
Well, I want
where
to,
we
you
started.
mentioned that Wenton is a historian.
Yes.
He gave you a history lesson,
He
I
did.
read in the
He
book.
did. So Wenton doesn't remember meeting me the first time, but I remember meeting him. Wenton is we're about the same age. I'm 57, and he's a little bit younger than me, I think. But he was doing a show. He was in Shenandoah. It's embarrassing to him. He was in Shenandoah with a girl that honey, don't listen to this. With a girl that I was dating, and I went to the show just to make sure, you know, that everything was good. I think he was like 14 or 15. And I met him at that time, and then didn't kind of get to know him a little bit later for about 4 or 5 years. And of course, the Marcellus family is the first family of music maybe in America. And many people don't know this, but Harry Connick, who actually, you know, people know really well, actually kind of grew up in Wenton's house.
I didn't know that.
Harry Connick, when he was a prodigy when he was young. His mother taught him how to play the piano. He was a classical pianist, but Harry has a little funk. Mm-hmm. And Harry's got a little groove. And Harry didn't want to be a classical pianist. Harry wanted to be a jazz pianist. And who was the best curator in this? It was Ellis Marcellus. And Harry Connick used to, in the afternoons, go over to Wenton's house. And Wenton had a bunch of brothers. And that's where Harry learned, really, how to play the kind of music that he's actually playing today. Harry Connick is a proficient classical pianist that people really haven't heard. But if he would put a tuxedo on and straighten up a little bit, he really plays well. And he doesn't want you to know that, but I just told you. But he grew up with Wenton, and Harry was a couple years behind me, and Harry went to Jesuit High School as well, so we kind of knew each other during that period of time. And of course, right after Katrina hit, Jazz at Lincoln Center, he and Quint Davis and a whole bunch of other folks with a Freeze paper that came up and said, we're going to help save New Orleans, and we're going to do a big concert. So Wenton and I got to be really close friends over time. And you came down and did your work during Katrina. And of course, Wenton went to Congress with us and helped talk about the importance of it as well. So we got very close. So when I became mayor of the city of New Orleans, of course, I can't do anything by myself. I have to ask a lot of people for help, and all of you have responded to my request for help, including you. We began to think about how to rebuild the city. And the mantra was, one team, one fight, one voice, one city. Stay focused, everybody get keyed into all of us being on the same team, all of us going in the same direction, all of us being purposeful and getting the city back on its feet, which we did in the first 4 years of my administration. But in the second 4 years, there had to be an organizing principle to keep the city focused on the future. And we were going to use our 300th anniversary to do that, which, by the way, we're celebrating next year. You're all welcome to come. But I kind of, as a mayor, was kind of looking for a tool to get people to really stay focused on how you keep moving the city forward in all of its different iterations when you're not asking the mayor's office to row, but generally to steer. And so in doing that, you know, I reached out to you, I reached out to a bunch of other people, and I said, how are we going to curate this 300th anniversary? Why don't we think about it like the Olympics or a World Cup, so that we can build massive infrastructure projects that will be thereafter, and then fill those physical structures up with the soul of New Orleans, so that in 2018 we can reflect to the world what the new New Orleans looks like, holding on to our past that was important, letting go of our past that was holding us back, and then thinking about what a 21st century knowledge-based economy that's rooted in history looks like. And in that regard, I asked Wenton to help curate it. And I kind of thought it was pretty easy. I'm the mayor, I set the vision. I asked Wenton to help me, and he said, yes, I will. But he said, I need you to do something for me. He asked me just this little bitty thing. Wasn't no big deal. He said, I want you to take down the Robert E. Lee statue.
And your first reaction was?
Well, I can't tell you what my first reaction was because this is recorded. But it was something like, have you lost your damn mind? He approximated that, although I think I used. And I said, Wenton, why? And he says, well, it's only Wenton can. He goes, well, have you thought about it?
Yeah.
And I said, no, I haven't thought about it. I've driven by that statute 1,000 times. I haven't thought about it once. He said, that's exactly my point. He said, do you know how it got there? I said, no, I don't know how it got there. What is it? It's Sunday morning. We're having coffee. Why are you grilling me? He said, well, why don't you think about it? And he said, but I'll tell you this, Louis Armstrong didn't come back to the city because of that statute and what it meant. And he said, as an African-American man, that statute's offensive to me. And he said, have you ever thought about it from our perspective? Well, of course, now we're in a serious conversation. We're not joking anymore. And I said, no, you know what? I'm ashamed to say that I haven't. And he said, well, hey, man, you know, well, you can hear Wynton saying this. He goes, hey, man, do me a favor. He says, just think about it. And so I called you like a little bit after that, and I said, Wynton, because he's helping me co-curate. He's my co-curator for the 300. I said, Wynton's got this crazy idea. And I said, what do you think? And he said, you said, I want to think about it. And I said, well, I'm going to think about it too, and you know, I'll holler back at everybody. And I knew, I mean,
I come off better in the book.
Yeah, no. Well, we had a later conversation about it. But in that moment, I said, let me, before I bothered anybody, let me go forward and really kind of think about this a little bit. And I started doing my own research. Now, I'm obviously not a historian, but I had some recollection of certain things that happened. And my initial reaction really was one of saying, I can't do that. I mean, this is huge. This is a big deal. This is going to cause a big fight. And I'm not even sure who owns the thing. I don't even know how I got it, but I looked into it. And after I did my research, essentially what I found after 4 or 5 months of looking into it, and this was, by the way, way before Charlotte. This was way before the presidential race. This was 2.5 years ago. I found out that the Robert E. Lee statute and the Confederate monuments had been put up on purpose well after the Civil War by a group of people called the Cult of the Lost Cause, who put them up purposefully to send a message that the Confederacy was a wonderful, beautiful thing and fought a war for a noble cause against the North, and wasn't it a shame that we lost, and we hope that the cause will always prevail. And it was put up to send a message, essentially. And that these monuments were put on city property that was owned by the city of New Orleans, most of it, one of them won. And that it was the mayor, who used to be a Confederate soldier, that put it up. Ostensibly, they basically rewrote history. And so, to check myself, I called Walter back. This was the second conversation that was longer, and I said, I really want to, before I do this, before I kind of get into this, I want to make sure that I've read the right historical documents, that I think that I'm on the right path. And truthfully, Walter, I've told you this before, but had you said to me at that time, you're on the wrong track, this is wrong, this doesn't make any sense, Wynton is a musician, he's not really a historian, he's a little off his rocker. If you would have said that, I would have just ended, but you didn't. You said, actually, I've thought about it a lot too, and you know what, I think Wynton's right. And I think that you're on the right track. And you know, how you do it is important. And so after that, I really had to do a lot of soul searching, because I knew, I had a premonition that when you start something like this was a pretty big deal. And after a whole bunch of research, talking to a lot of people around the country, I talked to Ken Burns, I talked to David Rubenstein, I talked to a lot of people that gave me comfort that I was right. I was pretty clear, after having made sure I was reading the right stuff, that basically these Confederate statutes were a historical lie, essentially, is what they were. And they were put up to revere the Confederacy and revere people who fought to tear the country apart all over the cause of slavery. And being a white, male, Christian from the South, I really thought it was important on the racial issue for somebody like me, that looked like me, that came from where I came from, to say clearly and unequivocally that slavery was wrong, the Confederacy was wrong, we're on the wrong side of history, and that a city like New Orleans that was trying to create a vision for the future had no business having reverential statutes like that in place that were not an accurate depiction of our history of who the city of New Orleans was. And so I asked the people of the city of New Orleans to consider taking them down, which I thought was, you know, going to be a no big deal thing. But all hell broke loose. And people got really upset. We had a lot of community hearings. They were very passionate. People had strong feelings on both sides. They still do. The anger hasn't ebbed.
Well, I mean, why do people fight to keep up Robert E. Lee?
I don't know. This really troubles me, because in the
Do you think it's racism?
Yeah, some of it is, but not all of it. But some of it clearly is, and there's a very strong white supremacist edge to this conversation, and I just think that it needs to be stated clearly in this country, right now, especially right now, because it's beginning to rear its head again. People have a First Amendment right to say whatever they want, but everybody in this country has an obligation to say, whether you're left, right, or middle, white supremacy or any notion or any iteration thereof or any poisonous fruit from that tree has no place in elected office or in the leadership roles in corporate boardrooms in the United States of America, which is why Roy Moore's defeat last night was really important. It was why you have to see Charlottesville very, very clearly. It's why you have to call these monuments out for what they are, because there is a dangerous tendency from time to time to allow yourself to rest in the bed of denial on these issues, and you cannot do that. A part of the book that's going to come out tells a story of when I was at Catholic University of America. I was a theater major and a political science major. I had been blessed to be part of a group of young actors that went over to Poznan, Poland to teach the history of the American musical theater. And when I was over there, it was right before the riots and the oppression. And I found myself on the gates of Auschwitz because it was not far away from there, and I felt compelled to go see it. And when I went to Auschwitz, as any person would be, you're overwhelmed by being in the presence of the space where the most evil thing that's happened in the history of the world happened. And of course, if you've been there, you are the one in Washington, but the authentic one is more powerful. You see stacks of hair and prosthetics and glasses and dentures, and you see suitcases with people's names on it, and you can almost see the ghost of the people who were taken from us, and you see the ovens, and you go, how in the world did humanity get so evil that it became okay to deny the humanity of people? And then my mind, because I was 19 or 20 at the time, right away took me to the South, where I was from, and the institution of slavery, and how the United States of America ever got to the point, even in this day and age, somehow glorifying anybody that had anything to do with it. And I remember at that time thinking that it is quite possible that this could happen again if people don't stand up and talk. So a few short years later, I was 19 at the time, I got elected to the legislature when I was 28. When I was 30 years old, David Duke got elected to the legislature from the state of Louisiana. And David Duke was sitting across from me in the state legislature. And we had to confront him. And the only way to deal with who he was to let people know what he thought. And he was a strong advocate of white supremacy, but he was tall, he was good looking, he spoke in code. And you know, he went on, as you know, to run for governor of the state of Louisiana and got 2 out of every 3 white votes. Now, nothing that's happening on the federal level right now in the United States of America has not already happened in Louisiana. And we know what this looks like, which is why you have to confront it. And it's why denial is not an option for the United States of America, which is one of the things that gave me the courage to finally stand up and say, you know what, this is really serious. This is an important thing. It's not a little thing. It's not just about aesthetics. We have to stop telling historical lies. And you have to put history in its proper perspective. And for people that said you're killing history, I said, no, actually, we're course correcting history. And you know, where there was a wrong, we're going to make it right. Where it was crooked, we're going to make it straight, because we have the ability to do that in this country. And that's really about, you know, why we did it. Now, I did not pull the trigger on this. I had thought about it for a good bit of time. And my city was going through something called the Welcome Table, which was a racial reconciliation exercise that we took out of South Africa that came, ironically, through Mississippi at the William Winston Institute of Racial Reconciliation. And I didn't pull the trigger until after Charleston because I wasn't sure what the right time was. But when the massacres in Charleston happened, and then your mind harkens back right away to the bombings in Birmingham with the little girls that were killed, you go, this can't keep happening. And we can't keep ignoring that. These symbols really, really matter. And when Nikki Haley and Joe Riley stood on the stage, a Democrat and Republican, and took that flag down, which, by the way, we did in 1966 in New Orleans, I kind of said, well, what's the difference between a...
By the way, your father did that.
Yeah, my father did that in 1960. Yeah, well, he took it. He actually did it. They did it in 1966 and 67. But I sat there and thought to myself, because my mind kept jumping across history from Charleston back to Birmingham in the bombing, and thinking this is going to keep going on. They finally had the courage to take down the flag, but what's the difference between the flag and the Confederate monuments? Now's the time. I made a political miscalculation, actually, that now was the time and everybody was going to see it clearly. I thought, why in the world would anybody defend keeping them up, given what happened in Charleston? And I misunderstood and still misunderstand the visceral connection that people have to these monuments. And some of it is racism. Some of it's just straight out racism. Some of it is just a connection to a physical thing that people don't understand. Like that's where I stood when my daddy took me to watch the Mardi Gras parades during the year. And I remember it as a physical thing. Some of it is, I think it's a beautiful piece of art, and I don't understand why people would be upset about it. And the most damning thing that people said to me about these monuments is that, you know what, Mitch, you're causing problems. You're dividing the city. Mostly white people, all white people, who would say something to me like this: I don't know anybody who is bothered by those monuments.
And you'd say,
and I'd
go
say,
meet some people.
I would say, that's exactly the problem.
Yeah.
And the reason I was able to say that is because Winton opened my eyes up to this when he asked me to see it from his perspective. And of course, once you do that, I want you to think about this. It's 2015, 16, second decade, 21st century. We're supposed to be moving forward, not back. The greatest trumpet player and the greatest historian in the world says, walk in my shoes. I actually could put myself in his shoes because I knew where he walked when he was a kid. Mm-hmm. And I started looking at the monuments from his perspective, and now I'm the mayor of a major American city that's 67% African American. It's on a piece of property that I'm responsible for. And Winton Marsalis tells me Louis Armstrong left, which makes perfect sense. That's one of the reasons why the Great Migration took place. How much intellectual capital, raw material, raw talent did we lose because our best and brightest went to New York? Winton's here now. He's at Jazz at Lincoln Center. He helped the $800 million infrastructure project with 3,000 jobs. That's not New Orleans, it's in New York. And you got my guy. You do. And how come he's not in New Orleans? Why is he in New York? Why did Andy Young leave Cleveland Street on Galvez in Cleveland and go become the mayor of Atlanta and have a city that dwarfs the size of New Orleans? Why did Louis Armstrong leave and take, you can not have to struggle really hard to say that if you make people feel unwelcome and there's no future for them and you don't value who they are as human beings, you don't get the benefit of the great things that they bring to life. And so New Orleans, in my opinion, has suffered tremendously. Why did Disney World go to Orlando rather than New Orleans? Why did Coca-Cola go to Atlanta? Why did Shell go to Houston? I happen to think that the answer to the rhetorical question that I asked the people of New Orleans, which was, why do you think we had 680,000 people in 1960? We were bigger than Houston and Atlanta, but the night before Katrina hit, we were dramatically smaller and we were a descending city. I think it's because it was an uninviting place for a lot of really smart, good people. And once I started thinking about this, you know, like you get hit in the head with a bat and your eyes open up and you go, oh my God, how have I been so ignorant my whole life? And I'm someone who comes from a very racially progressive family. And as I started thinking about that history, and then I started thinking about the future that I was trying to build for the city, I realized that I wasn't governing with integrity. That if I wanted to build a multicultural city, New Orleans really was, then our public spaces and what we reverenced had to line up with who we really were. And quite frankly, I just thought it was not something that I could look away from after I really kind of understood it and knew it. Not only from Winton's perspective, who was by this time a 56-year-old older African-American man, but when I started talking to mothers and they were talking to their daughters, and this is part of the speech that I gave, which kind of sealed it for me, was when one of the mothers told me that she really didn't think much about the monuments, African-American businesswoman, until the week before when she said that she had her 12-year-old daughter in the car. This is a true story. And the little girl says to her mama, they were driving by the circle where Robert E. Lee is, which is the most prominent circle in the city. It's not some faraway place. It's like the biggest, only circle that we have in the city. And the little girl says, Mama, who's that guy? And the mama says, oh, honey, that's Robert E. Lee. So who is Robert E. Lee? She said, oh, he was a great general. Really? And he fought in a war? Yeah. Well, what war did he fight in? He fought in the Civil War. Well, Mama, what side did he fight for? Oh, honey, he fought for the Confederacy. He said, Mama, isn't those are the people that wanted to keep me a slave. And the mother said, you know what, that's when I realized when I saw it through the eyes of my 12-year-old daughter that that thing did not belong there, because that statute made her feel less than. That statute was not a message that lifted her up or gave her hope, nor did she want to live in a city that made her feel that way. And I saw my grandchildren in that child's eyes, which are yet to be born. I don't have them, but I'm thinking about what do you say to your grandchild who looks at you and says, Papa, when you were the mayor, and then that statue, what did you do about it? So I kind of thought at that time that, you know what, this is really a fight worth having. This is really not just about aesthetics. It's about the future of the city and the future of the country. And we got about doing it. Eventually they came down, but it wasn't until we went through a very, very painful exercise and a lot of vitriol and a lot of anger and a lot of upset. And as I've said to the country about race, you can't go over it, you can't go around it, you can't go over it, you have to go through it. And going through it's painful, because you have to have conversations with people that you know and people that you love, like your brothers and sisters and your mother and father and your aunts and uncles and people that used to be friends and supporters that will say to you, like my father's catcher on his baseball team said when St. Matthias got integrated and my father wouldn't pull us out, Moon, I'll never talk to you again, because you brought African-American people into the city, and friendships get lost. And it's just a hard thing to go through. But you got to go through it to get to the other side, because there is a better place.
It's something we need to do today. I'm going to get a couple of quick questions. I know we've gone a bit long, but let's take a couple of questions. And as you're raising your hand, I can't quite see you. Let me just say one thing. We're talking about leadership here. Getting to the right place intellectually, is sometimes hard, but it's not courageous. I got there intellectually. I've watched you and inclusiveness, Drew Faust at Harvard, another person who decides something intellectually and then is willing to show leadership and actually get it done. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
That's right there. Stand up, the mic is to your right.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Tully. I love New Orleans.
Hey, Lindsay.
Thank you.
And I wanted to have you talk a little bit about what the infrastructure changes has been made in light of climate changes, and how you're prepared, and how you and New York City are working together. And do you have your own Dutchman who's helping you, like I know New York City is using?
And
Could you talk a little bit about
president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and I think all mayors are facing this. So,
Well, first of all, climate change is real. And man contributes to it. You think that's settled? There are a lot of people who still argue about that, but in New Orleans we believe that to be true. So, without trying to, because I told y'all are all my friends, but after Katrina hit, a bunch of people thought we didn't need to be in New Orleans, that we were silly for living in a place that was below sea level, and of course this could never happen in New York. Until Sandy hit.
yeah.
Right, Donna? I see you back there. And so what we've come to realize in the country, a couple different things. One, we already know this, but we won't do anything about it, evidently, in Washington, is that the infrastructure in the country is crumbling. The infrastructure that we know we need, not the new stuff that we know we need, but you've gone through this stuff with the subway, right? Aren't y'all shutting down the subway this week because of infrastructure upgrades? Roads, bridges, ports, airports, et cetera. The country needs a massive upgrade as it relates just to basic infrastructure. But Katrina, you may have forgotten, was an infrastructure failure.
Right.
It happened because the levees broke. When hurricanes come in, they go out, people get hurt, we fix things, but the levees broke and the city, filled up with water. And so the country began to realize then, and then post-Sandy, that Miami, New York, there are a whole bunch of places that are at risk because climate change is going to force sea levels to rise. In Louisiana, we got a bucket load of different things. We got the coast that's eroding at 100 yards every 45 minutes. The land is subsiding because it's soft. And then, of course, the sea level is rising because of climate change. And all three of those things put us at risk, something that's called an existential threat. Really, no bull. We're going to cease to exist in 100 years if we don't do something dramatically different. And of course, you see this in Sandy. So when this first happened, we did something smart like you guys did. So who knows about water? instead of the Dutch and the folks in the Netherlands, because what happened in the mid-50s. And we have begun to reconstruct our physical infrastructure to protect ourselves for what we think is coming our way. So we've built a $14.6 billion levee system that surrounds the city of New Orleans. We have, with the Rockefeller Foundation, become one of the nation's first, what they call 100 resilient cities that Judith Rodin and a lot of folks worked on, and are beginning to rebuild our infrastructure in strong and smarter and better ways. We're thinking about, so you remember after Sandy, not to just kind of rub too much, you know, no pun intended, sand in it, but you remember when Sandy hit, you know, Bellevue lost electricity because all the stuff was in the basement? We had that same thing that happened in Rita and Katrina, and unfortunately, New York didn't learn from us, just like many of us didn't learn after September 11th. So with best practices, we now have to start thinking about making sure that our electric grid is strong and resilient, and then you have generators to back up the kind of power outages, because I think the power was out for 2 or 3 days, maybe 4, for a bit, especially from lower Manhattan, I think up to 50th. And so we are beginning to reconceptualize how we rebuild stronger and better, because storms are coming, they're stronger, and lots of things are happening. You've noticed the wildfires, I'm paying attention to that. So these iterations are coming at us, you know, these storms are coming to us in different iterations in different places. And the notion of resilience, which is a word that really wasn't in our lexicon pre-Sandy, actually started to really be a part of what cities around the world are thinking about as they rebuild, and we're thinking about that as well. We are still not, by the way, as a country, where we need to be on climate change. The Trump administration, as you know, pulled out of the Paris Accords. The mayors of America, I represent 1,400 cities, have basically said, being led by Rahm Emanuel, Eric Garcetti, Mayor de Blasio, Mayor Walsh, a whole bunch of other mayors.
And Mike Bloomberg.
And Mike Bloomberg, one of the most, forgive me, Mike, for forgetting, he's helped lead the effort. The mayors of America are going to do it ourselves, because 85% of the people in the country live in the cities. And by the way, this is where the work gets done anyway. And whether Congress comes or not, we're going to hit our goals of reducing our carbon footprint and helping get to the Paris Accords. It would obviously be much better if the federal government was there and present and leaning forward, as opposed to just being absent or actually trying to pull us behind. But the EPA and this president are not going there right now, so we're going to have to do the best we can without them. Hope they catch us. Yep.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry, we'll make this the last question, though, since we've...
Well, then I'll give you a good one. So rumor has it you're running for president. You care to expound on that?
Is that to me or Mitch?
That's Walter. I'll tell you what...
Do a serious answer there, because we've got to figure this out.
I'll tell him what Mayor Skiro said. Said, don't believe any rumors unless you hear them from me first. I'm not running for president, but thank you for asking.
And then, so we can make it a finale question, though, in the post-Trump era, what type of leaders, you know, we always have pendulums in America, they swing back. What do you see as the next wave of leadership?
Well, I say this, what I'm about to say, I don't mean out of disrespect. I really don't. It's worth thinking about. I actually went to the Aspen Security Group meeting with a bunch of folks to talk about how to keep the nation secure. And essentially all the smart national security folks think about ways to lean forward, lean back, or contain certain leaders. When we talked about North Korea, the issue was how do you contain what could possibly happen with an irrational leader? And it sounded a lot like, well, what are you supposed to do when a president begins to act irrationally? How do you really contain that? And I know all of us sit around and get really aggravated with all the tweets and the kind of craziness that's going on right now in the country. And it's not too soon to start thinking about a post-Trump era, whether that's going to be in 3 years or in 7 years. It's going to end, all right? It's going to end at some point in time. And if you think about it, because I'm talking to great historians, 8 years is really a blink of an eye in the arc of history. And how you respond and what you do while you have a difficult leader like that in place kind of portends what happens next. And so I think people really, to the extent that you can, this is going to come out the wrong way, because you can't ever ignore the President of the United States. It is singularly the most powerful office in the world. But you can work in a way that minimizes the impact in the event that the executive branch of government is not acting correctly. It is not the only thing in the institution of democracy. It does require people to stand up and to be counted. It does require that. And so my humble opinion about this is there's no amount of tax reform, there's no amount of regulatory reform, there's no amount of appointments to the Supreme Court or to the appellate court or to the lower courts that would justify a country turning a blind eye to a leader that's going to take us in the wrong direction and take us out of bounds. We have got to get back in bounds. And you see this beginning to happen over time. So you see guys like Jeff Flake and Corker and a number of different, Senator Murkowski and Senator Collins, being able to say to the conservatives in this country, we are out of bounds. When that begins to happen, the country should pay attention. You really should. I'm sure that the Democrats and the liberals are going to have this at some point in time. We may be getting close to that, we may not, but you got to stay within the bounds of what a republic needs in order to survive long term. We're not even 300 years old yet. I mean, Europe and China, I mean, they outpace us by thousands of years. We have got to keep the republic strong, and the institutions have to remain strong. And so I'm not saying not to give due deference to the office of the president. We should always do that while being hard on the person that's in there to make sure that they lead the country in the right direction. But we don't have to be led in the direction that the president wants to take us in if we as a country don't want to go there. He kind of works for us. And it's important for people to say that and to think through whether or not our silence on certain issues because we think we're going to get a better deal on tax reform or whatever enables us to go into a direction that's going to cause the United States of America to lose so much stature in the world that it's going to take us 15 to 20 years to get it back. I happen to think that the country right now is as strong as it has ever been, that notwithstanding the fact that we are still in a couple of wars, that this doesn't approximate World War I, World War II, or Korea, or Vietnam, that we actually have a chance to continue to lead the world, but we're losing value very, very quickly, and I don't think that we ought to do it more than we absolutely have to, and it's going to require leaders on both sides of the aisle, on the business side and the political side, to stand up and to be counted and to lead the country in the direction that I think it needs to go in, and I think we started last night.
Mayor Landrieu, thank you so very much. Thank you.